Today, we are tackling a really critical psychological skill: how to set and, more importantly, enforce boundaries with a narcissist. And let me tell you, this is so much more than just learning to say no. It's a very methodical process, really a form of self-preservation. So let's start by getting to the core of the conflict. This quote just cuts right to the chase, doesn't it? You see, for most of us, we think of boundaries as a sign of mutual respect. It's healthy. But in the dynamic with a narcissist, they see it as a direct challenge to their power. And that fundamental difference in how it's perceived is exactly why setting even the simplest limit can turn into such a huge battle. All right, so here's our game plan. We've broken this down into 5 key parts to really get a handle on it. First, we'll dig into the challenge itself. Then, we'll define what a boundary really is in this specific context. After that, we'll walk through exactly how to set one, look at the crucial role of consequences, and finally, we'll talk about the real-world impact you can expect. So let's dive right into that central conflict. For a narcissist, relationships are often seen through a lens of power and control. So when you set a boundary, it's not heard as a request for respect, it's seen as an obstacle to their dominance. And their very first impulse is to find a way to tear it down. And this slide just lays it out so clearly. On one side, you've got the healthy view, right? Boundaries are the bedrock of any respectful relationship. But then you have the narcissist's view, where a boundary is basically a dare. It's a line they feel compelled to cross to prove they're still in control. They will absolutely test it, twist it, and try to violate it, which turns the simple act of setting a boundary into a constant psychological fight. So knowing that fundamental conflict exists, we need to be incredibly clear about what a boundary really is in this kind of high-stakes environment, because it is so much more than just a simple rule or a guideline for how to behave. Normally, you think of a boundary as, where you end and another person begins. But in a relationship with a narcissist, that whole concept has to evolve. It becomes, and I mean this quite literally, a psychological survival device. It's the tool you use to protect your very core sense of self. And this is a perfect example of what I mean. Think about a boundary like, I will not tolerate being yelled at. That's not just about wanting someone to be polite. It's a protective barrier. It's you actively preventing aggressive, abusive behavior from becoming the new normal in your dynamic. Okay, so we know what a boundary is. Now for the really big question, how do you actually do it correctly? Well, it takes what you might call surgical precision, because any little bit of vagueness, any wiggle room will absolutely be exploited. This is where being crystal clear is everything. A vague statement like, I want more respect, is just way too subjective. A narcissist can easily turn that around and say, what are you talking about? I do respect you. But an effective boundary, it's objective, it's non-negotiable. If you raise your voice, I will leave the room. It's a clean, cause and effect statement that leaves zero room for debate. This brings us to a really clear 5-step protocol. First, you've got to do a self-assessment and pinpoint where the abuse is happening over and over. Second, you define your boundary in a short, clear statement. Third, you communicate it directly and calmly. Seriously, the more you try to justify or explain, the more ammo you give them for an argument. Fourth, and this is the big one, you have to be consistent. And finally, step 5, prepare yourself for the pushback, because it is coming. And here are a few concrete examples of how this looks in the real world. Notice a pattern here? Every single one is specific, it's action-oriented, and it's focused on what you are going to do, not what you're demanding from them. This is so key because it shifts the center of control right back to you. Now we get to what is maybe the most critical piece of this entire puzzle. This is the part that actually gives a boundary its power. See, just saying the words, just communicating the limit, that's only step 1. Without a consequence, your boundary is really just a suggestion. And we all know how easily suggestions can be ignored. And for that consequence to actually work, it has to be a concrete action you can actually do, something that's proportional to what happened, and this is the most important part. You have to apply it every single time. Any inconsistency, any slip-up sends a clear message. With enough pressure, this boundary will eventually collapse. And you have to be ready for this, because I guarantee you there will be pushback. You can expect tactics like guilt-tripping and blackmail, or even gaslighting, where they flat out deny you ever set the boundary in the first place. The goal behind all of these tactics is always the same: to destabilize you and test your resolve until you finally back down. I love this quote because it completely flips the script. That intense, angry, negative reaction you're getting, that is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. Quite the opposite. It's proof that your boundary is effective. It means you've touched a nerve and you're challenging their sense of control, which is exactly the point. So, finally, let's talk about the reality of all this. What can you actually expect from this process? It's really important to go into this knowing that it can be transformative, for sure, but it is also an emotionally draining journey. You know, a huge part of this process is actually a kind of grieving. So many of us hold on to this hope that one day the narcissist will finally get it, they'll understand, they'll change. And realizing that the violations are just going to keep happening can be really painful. The goal then has to shift from trying to change them to learning how to protect yourself.
But, and this is a huge but, the long-term benefits are profound. When you consistently enforce your boundaries, you reduce your exposure to abuse. That, in turn, strengthens your own emotional clarity and helps rebuild your self-esteem. It lays the foundation for maybe going low contact or even no contact. And ultimately, it's the path back to reclaiming the inner freedom that this dynamic has tried so hard to take from you.
So let's wrap up with this final thought. It is absolutely crucial to understand that doing this is not an act of selfishness. It's an act of fundamental self-preservation. It's you affirming that you have a right to dignity and safety. So the question I want to leave you with is this: which protective barrier in your own life needs to be reinforced today?